Good morning, everyone. We are in Maseches Meiser Sheni, Parak Daled Mishna Ches, Chapter 4, Mishna 8. Today's learning is dedicated in memory of my mother, Shalamis Bas Rabbi Eliezer, and has been sponsored by John and Eleanor Perlman as a Refuah Shalema merit for their daughter. One second. For their daughter. One second, please. Okay, today's learning is sponsored for their daughter, Rebecca Feld, Chai Gittel Bas Eterivka. Now, we have been discussing until now the halacha of the fact that we can redeem Meiser Sheni produce onto money, and we take that money to Yerushalayim. Now, when we're talking about using that money, right? When we're talking about transferring the sanctity of produce onto money, it's not like it has to be done in one shot. You could actually set aside money, and you will redeem Meiser Sheni produce onto that money. You can do it bit by bit until the coin is full, until the entire value of the coin has been used to redeem Meiser Sheni produce. But it doesn't have to happen at one time. It can happen little by little. So the case of the Mishnah is like this. Hamaniach Isser v'achal alav chetziyah. A person put aside an Isser. Now, an Isser is a silver coin that is generally worth 8 copper prutais. This is an important thing to keep in mind for this Mishnah. You've got a Isser is worth 8 prutais. And let's say for the case of the Mishnah, a fig costs a pruta. So now, you set aside an Isser, which is worth 8 prutas, and you used up half of it. Half of it has been used to transfer sanctity from Meiser Sheni produce onto the money. So that means 4 prutas worth of this Isser have the sanctity of Meiser Sheni, the other 4 are chulin. And now he went to another place and took this coin with him. Varehu yoitze b'funyan, and it went up in value to the value of a funyan. A funyan is a silver coin that's worth 2 Isser. And originally, where you started off with, the coin was worth 1 Isser, but now you took it to a different place. And this other place that notes here on the point out, it might be that in this place there is a great demand for Issers, so their value is double what it was in its original location. So that means with the Isser, which was originally half a funyan, and now went up to the value of 2 Isser, which is now a full funyan, which means it went from 8 prutas to 16 prutas. You can now use for this coin another Isser, because if originally it was worth 8, now it's worth 16, half of it was used. So that means now 8 prutas worth of this Isser are sanctified, and 8 are still chulin. If you have 8 prutas worth of chulin, that means you have the value of an Isser. And therefore now you can now redeem another the value of an Isser of Meiser Sheni produce onto this coin since it went up in price. Let's say the case is that you set aside a funyoin, which remember is 2 Isser, and that is what you set aside to redeem Meiser Sheni onto as time went on, bit by bit. And you now you used up half of it. So that means you started off with 16 prutes, and now you're left, and now you have 8 prutes that are saying to have Meiser Sheni sanctity. 8 prutes are chulin. Now you took the coin with you somewhere else, and it decreased in value. It went from a funyon down to an Isser. It means it went from 16 to 8, which means now you have 4 and 4. Plug, you can still eat, meaning you can still use half of the value of this pruta for the purposes of half the value of this coin to continue to redeem Meiser Sheni, because it went down from 16 to 8. Now in 8, you have half of it is sanctified. That means 4 prutas worth are sanctified. Another 4 prutas worth are not sanctified. So that's half of the value that it is right now. And basically, whatever it is, if let's say you have a fig, you sell a fig goes for a pruta, you're able now to redeem 4 more figs based on the corresponding to the 4 prutas of value left in this Isser coin. So here the Mishnah dealt with a case where you had a coin, you were redeeming Meiser Sheni slowly onto the coin. The coin, part of the coin was sanctified. The other part of the coin is the other part of the coin, meaning part of the value of the coin is sanctified, part of the value isn't sanctified. And in a situation where the value of the coin goes up, then the half that was left unsanctified and able to be used to redeem more Meiser Sheni produce, you could do more. And if it goes down in price, you can only do less. So that's the first half of the Mishnah. Now the Mishnah deals with the following case. And here the Mishnah is actually talking about where you have, as we said, when you have Meiser Sheni money, the money that used to redeem Meiser Sheni, what do you do with that money? You take it to Yerushalayim and spend in Yerushalayim. Now, spending in Yerushalayim doesn't mean that you have to actually go and take the money and buy something with it. You can actually have the money there, take food that you have, again, as long as it's the food that can be that can be eaten as Meiser with the sanctity of Meiser Sheni, and you can say that that X amount of value of the coin is now to be redeemed or transferred onto this food, and now this food gains the Meiser Sheni sanctity, and you have to eat it accordingly. So what you're doing is, again, instead of in one shot transferring the sanctity of the money onto the food in one shot, rather you're doing it bit by bit. You're doing it in pieces. And again, you don't have to spend it. You could just go ahead and say, this food is now some of the sanctity of the money is going to be transferred onto this food. This food has the sanctity of Meiser Sheni, you have to eat it accordingly. So here's the case like this. But what the point of the Mishnah is going to be is, so again, as time goes on, you're using up more and more, meaning more and more of the value of the coin is going back to becoming chulin. It's the sanctity is going off of it. The Mishnah is going to tell us that at a certain point of time, when you get to a certain level of value, of a small level of value to the coin, in order now for the entire value of the coin to be chulin, for all the sanctity to go off, you won't even have to switch it. You won't have to switch it onto money, onto food. It automatically, the kedusha, the sanctity automatically goes off. At a certain point of time, it reaches a certain level of value, meaning it decreases to a certain, the sanctity decreases to it's only on a small amount of the value of the coin, the sanctity goes off. Now, where is that? So meniach iser shel Meiser Sheni. One sets aside a coin of Meiser Sheni. This coin is Meiser Sheni. At the beginning, it was just a regular coin, which you're now putting Meiser Sheni sanctity onto. Here, we're starting off with a coin that is already sanctified as Meiser Sheni. and you are slowly removing the sanctity from the value bit by bit as you transfer it onto food in Yerushalayim. Now let's first just translate the words. You can now eat on it, meaning you could transfer its sanctity on the food that you eat until you come to a point of achar asar be'isser, until 1/11 of the isser remains. Ve'achmimea be'isser, or until 1/100th of the isser remains. Meaning, in certain situations, when you get to the point that there's only 1/11 of the isser that's sanctified, the sanctity disappears. It goes off on its own. And in other cases, you'll have that if once you hit the point of 1/100th of the value of the isser of this coin that was Meiser Sheni, if only 1/100th of its value remains sanctified, you won't have to go ahead and eat other food corresponding to it. To transfer it onto the food, it'll go off on its own. So when do we say it's 1/11th? When do we say it's 1/100th? And the answer is, and again, this is the first opinion regarding the situation in the Mishnah, it depends on whether we're talking about a coin of Meiser Sheni Vadai, meaning we're talking about that it was, the original produce was for sure Meiser Sheni, and you redeemed it onto the coin, or are we talking about Meiser Sheni of Demai, as we mentioned previously? Demai is grain bought from an Am Haaretz, where the rabbis obligated us to separate the Meisris, the tithings from it, because we're concerned that there are some Am Haaretz who don't do it. In essence, probably he did it, but we have to be strict in case he didn't. And if that's the case, if you have to treat the produce, you have to treat the produce like Meiser Sheni. I mean, it's questionable Meiser Sheni, but you got to treat like Meiser Sheni. Got to take to Yerushalayim or give it onto money. If the money that we're talking about here, that you're trying to transfer its sanctity from, was a coin that was used to redeem Meiser Sheni of Demai, then already we say that that's going to be different. Okay, which means like this. I think I may have said it wrong. In the case of, if the point is that once it hits 1/11th of the value, then it goes off. That's by Demai. By Demai, it's going to go off quicker than by Vadai. By the Vadai, when the coin was used for certain Meiser Sheni, then already it goes up until you have 1/100th left. So again, it comes off quicker. It comes off easier, so to speak, or quicker when the coin was used to redeem Meiser Sheni of Demai, and it's 1/100th when you are talking about a coin of Meiser Sheni that was certain Meiser Sheni. Now, what's the explanation to this? How do we understand, this difference between the Demai and between the regular? What's exactly happening here? How are we understanding this difference? So the commentary of the Tosfos Yontiv explains it in the following way. And that is that we know that there is a concept, we learned this a while ago when we were learning Shumas, and that is that we know there's a concept of bittul, nullification, where if something that is forbidden falls into something permissible and gets mixed into it, and it's not recognizable anymore. So according to Torah law, a majority is enough to nullify it. According to rabbinic law, again, where it's the same kind of thing and it's not recognized dividend in any way, you need 60 times. When it comes to truma, you need 100 times. So if you have truma grain that falls into chulin grain, the only time the rabbis only allowed the truma to be considered nullified if there's 100 times more. So what we have here is like this. So there you need 100 to 1. What we're saying here, according to this opinion of the Mishnah, when it comes to Meiser Sheni, when Meiser Sheni gets mixed in, which in this case means like this: I've got this coin. The coin, a large percentage of the coin now, its value is chulin. A small amount of it has sanctity Meiser Sheni. We are saying the way we're working things now is that we want to see the Meiser Sheni become nullified. We want the value that has the Meiser Sheni become nullified in the value that's chulin, that's not sanctified. By Meiser Sheni, the sages said 99 to 1 is enough. Meaning if I have 100th left, that means I have 99 parts of a chulin, and one part that is Meiser Sheni, there the rabbi said that's enough for us to be that we're willing to consider the Meiser Sheni nullified. It would sound this is a rabbinic law, like we have by Truma. 100 to 1 by Truma is not, according to Torah law, that's rabbinic law to become nullified. That's what we're saying here also when it comes to the remaining value of the coin that has a sanctity of Meiser Sheni. And we're saying that it is disappearing. It's disappearing because it's becoming nullified in the 99 other parts of chulin. So that's when we're talking about that stringency, that idea that you has to go down to that much is only where the coin was used to redeem Meiser Sheni that was certain Meiser Sheni. However, if the Meiser Sheni that the coin was used to redeem was the Mai, which is running rabbinically sanctified, there we're more lenient. And then we say, once it goes down to the point of 1/11th of the value, you have 10 parts to 1. Then we say by Demai, in the case where it was used to sanctify, to redeem Demai, that's already the point where at that point, where it's 1/11th that's left, 10 to 1, that is when we say that the sanctity goes off. Now this is the first opinion of the Mishnah. Now we're going to have two others. Beis Shammai say in this case, Hakar Lasara, whether we're talking about Meiser Sheni, the money was used to redeem certain Meiser Sheni, whether the money was used to redeem Meiser Sheni of Demai, once, in both cases, once it goes down to 1/10 of the value goes off. Well, Beis Hillel say, Beis Hillel will differentiate between whether the original Meiser Sheni was certain Meiser Sheni of Demai Meiser Sheni, but Beis Hillel differentiates in the following way. Beis Hillel say, if we're talking about certain Meiser Sheni, the money was used to redeem Meiser Sheni that was certain, that was for sure Meiser Sheni. Once it hits 1/11th, that is when the sanctity goes off. Or the Demai, we're talking about Demai, Asara, 1/10. Okay, so according to Beis Hillel, if the money was used to redeem Meiser Sheni that was certain Meiser Sheni, then when it becomes 1/11th of the value, 10 to 1, that is when the sanctity goes off. If it's Demai, if it's 1/10, that's when it's going to go off. So what's the explanation of Beis Hillel? So the Bartanura explains in the following way. It works like this. We have to start off, we're talking about an Isser here. Talking about an Isser. An Isser is 8 prutas, as we said before. An Isser is 8 prutas. So now, if you go, let's take how much is 1/10 of an Isser? If an Isser is 8 prutas, then 1/10 of the Isser is, 1/8 of a pruta. Now, typically, less than a pruta, if something falls to the value, if something is at the value less than a pruta, it really has no significance in Jewish law. We don't really pay much attention to it. There are many examples in Jewish law, in halacha, that when something is less than a pruta, it really doesn't matter. So Beis Hillel will say like this. Beis Hillel will say, if I still have 1/10 left in the Meiser Sheni, in the coin that had the Meiser Sheni sanctity, if there's 1/10 of it that's still sanctified, I'm not going to say it goes off. I'm going to have to basically eat more. I'm going to have to use more food. I'm going to have to eat food corresponding to the value, transferring the value from the coin onto the food in order to make it the amount low enough for it to disappear, to be nullified. What's the calculation of 1/11th? So the calculation goes like this. We just said 1/10 of an Isser is 8/10 of a pruta. 8/10 of a pruta is less than a pruta. However, when you redeem Meiser Sheni, we have learned, you add 1/5 to the value, right? When you redeem Meiser Sheni, when you transfer it onto the food, you don't just transfer it onto the food based on its value. You have to add what was called 1/4 of its value that then becomes a fifth of the total. We call it a chumash, we call it a fifth. It's a fee, it's an addition of a fifth. The way you calculate that fifth is you take a quarter of the value, add it on, which now becomes a fifth of the total. So when you have, let's say you have produce of Ma'aser Sheni, that's only 8/10 of a pruta, right? However, if you want to redeem it, the way you would redeem it is you'd have to add another fifth to it, you'd have to add another fifth to it, and to be able to redeem it. And when you'd add another fifth to it, what would you have? What's a fifth? Well, if you're taking something is a tenth of an isser, it's 8/10 of a pruta. So the addition to it, the fifth addition, is a quarter, is 2/10. And then eventually you have 10/10. You have a full pruta. So basically I'll say, if I still have the value of 8/10 of a pruta, I'm not going to say that that's insignificant and the sanctity is going to go off. Because if you add that, if you were to take that value and add the fifth fee, the chomesh, the 1/5 of the total fee to it, I would come out with a pruta. And therefore, since this value has that possibility of having that, if a fifth would be added to it, in cases where you add the fifth, if the fifth would be added to it, it would now become a pruta. The sanctity doesn't come off. And that's why Beis Hillel say, if it's certain, if the money was used to redeem Ma'aser Sheni that was certain Ma'aser Sheni, then it has to already drop to 1/11. If it's 1/11 of the value, then even if I add a fifth, it's still not going to be a full pruta. So then the sanctity goes off. When it comes to Demai, then Beis Hillel say, even 1/10, it's going to fall off. Because when you redeem Demai, you don't add a fifth. So Demai never has that possibility of the fifth being added to it. And therefore, once it goes down to 1/10 once it's only 1/10 of its value, that's retaining the sanctity of the Ma'aser Sheni of Demai, then we say it falls off automatically. It doesn't have that rationale that we use by the money used to redeem certain Ma'aser Sheni of the fifth added to it, to say that when I have 8/10 of a pruta, I can still give it significance, because if I were to add a fifth to it, it'll become a full pruta, because by Demai, you never add a fifth. Okay, we are now in Klal Vav, chapter 6 of the Sefer Chavetz Chaim and the laws of Lashon Harah. Paragraph Aleph, paragraph 1. Asur lekabel Lashon Harah min haTorah. Not only is it forbidden to speak Lashon Harah, you're not allowed to accept Lashon Harah that you hear from someone else. Whether what's being said relates to matters between man and God, or between man and his fellow Jew. The Hainu, what this means is we're not allowed to believe that what we heard is true. Because if we believe the Lashon Harah, that person will now be degraded in our eyes. And even if you're hearing someone else speak the Lashon Harah, and you didn't show him that you agree to what he says, all you did was just listen and accept. Still, it's going to be forbidden. Because if not only do you accept, you actually show him, you say, you're right? Or you actually explicitly agree to what he's saying. You've doubled what you've done wrong, because now by openly agreeing to him, you're also speaking Lashon Harah, besides accepting what you heard from him. One who accepts Lashon Harah transgresses a prohibition of the Torah, as it states, the Torah says, do not accept a false report. And our sages say in the Mechilta, which is a form of medrash, or call it halachic medrash, on the Torah, this is a warning not only when it comes to actual testimony in a rabbinic court of law, it also a warning and to accepting Lashon Harah. And although I called it Medrash here, Medrash means it's something that we derive from the words of the Torah, and the Mechilta is talking about deriving halacha, Jewish law, from from laws mentioned explicitly in the Torah. When you read this verse in the Torah, don't accept a false report, you would have said that that's referring to accepting a false testimony from witnesses. But the Mechilta tells us there's another layer to it, and it's included in the prohibition, which is not to accept Lashon Harah. Okay. V'amru Chazal, or sages stated, person who accepts Lashon Harah should be thrown to the dogs. Shenemar, as it says, the Torah has this verse of not accepting a false report, which we just said includes accepting Lashon Harah. And right after that, the Torah talks about another subject. The Torah there says it's talking about actually meat that is not kosher, that you should throw it to the dog. Well, we have the fact that they're near each other gives us license to also say that there is this idea here, the one who accepts Lashon Harah should also, so to speak, is worthy of being thrown to the dogs. Our sages also say that it's greater is the punishment for a person who accepts the Lashon Harah more than the one who says it. Clearly, from the statement before also, it's very clear that accepting Lashon Harah is pretty serious. We don't say that about speaking Lashon Harah, we say that about accepting Lashon Harah. And here again, we say that the punishment for one who accepts Lashon Harah is greater than the one who says it. I was thinking that the reason for this is because, when a person speaks Lashon Harah, as we've said, Lashon Harah is even if it's true. So you saw something, you know it, and you're telling it over. You shouldn't tell it over, but you know it. It's the truth, and you're saying it over. The person who hears it from you has no real basis to accept it as the truth because you said so. Number one, you can't really even be trusted because you're speaking Lashon Harah, which is going to be mentioned in the Chavetz Chaim. You can't accept someone who speaks Lashon Harah. He's committing a sin when he's doing it. You can't believe him then. So you have no and you have no basis. So he said it. So therefore what? It's only one person. And because you're now accepting it as the truth only based on what you heard, that's very serious. Why are you accepting something as a truth? Why are you accepting negative information about a person as the truth and having him now be considered lower in your eyes because of that, just because you heard it from someone? And therefore, that is perhaps why accepting Lashon Harah is worse than speaking Lashon Harah. Have a wonderful day.